So if we look at one cell, how does one cell connect to each other? How do we kind of anchor our cell to the ground right here? Right? We need all of these because we're going to have a lateral surface, we're going to have a basal surface. Right? So each of these lateral surface areas, they're all going to have specific functions. So we're going to see there are regions in our body where we're going to have tight junctions between the cells. Well, the tight junctions is like a Gore-Tex waterproof seal. Nothing gets through. Then you have cells, now I mean nothing gets through, that's good and it's bad, right? If nothing gets through, acids, things can't get through. But other good things can't get through as well. Nutrients can't get through in between. Nothing gets through. So we don't want the whole region of our body with tight junctions, only in specific areas. So we'll have regions that are slightly less sealed with adhesion belts. And then ones that allow you to move the cell completely. So as I move one cell, the next cell it's attached to moves slightly as well. So then you don't rip one cell from each other, right? So we have all of these different junctions, and these junctions have different functions. So let's take a look at these right here. First one, desmosomes. Desmosomes are found on the sides right here. Now what I want you to know with desmosomes is where they're found. Found in areas that are subjected to a lot of stress. So where do we see a lot of stress? In our epidermis. So in the epidermis, those stratified squamous cells that are up here, right? These stratified squamous cells here are connected to each other by desmosomes. And you'll see that in chapter 5 when we get through it next week, right? That they're actually color-coded green connections that they'll show, right? The desmosomes are color-coded green here. So just keep that in mind. They kind of maintain that color coding even for the next chapter. Now the desmosomes are important because they allow, so when I move, right, part of my skin, as I move part of my skin, when I move that cell, the cell then moves other cells it's connected to. And those cells move other cells they're connected to. So then I can move the whole layer. And then I don't destroy that layer just by moving it. So right, it allows for movement of the cells within a given layer. So then you're moving it as a sheet of cells. So as the cell moves, it pulls on other cells. So not one single cell just receives all the tension, right? If you did, the cells are microscopic, they're not very strong. You will rupture that cell, right? By having these connections, the cell then can distribute that stress to all the cells they're connected to. That's a desmosome. So if I move this cell right here, because of the desmosomes, right, what happens is that movement of the cell, well, some of the stress gets moved to the next cell it's connected to. And then this cell will be connected to another cell that has a desmosome. So you can redistribute all that stress. So then not one single cell is damaged by it. The next ones are Hemi Desmosomes. Hemi being half. Hemi Desmosomes, right here, are found on the basal surface. These are our anchoring studs, right? These is like the steel girders that we put into our bedrock foundation. So I don't know, you guys are pretty young, and you guys probably weren't here when they were building Pfizer Forum. But when they were building the Pfizer Forum, what they did was they kind of got rid of all of the ground, right? It used to be a parking lot. They got rid of the parking lot. And for like 3 months, all they did was they had this huge ball, and they were just slamming these huge steel girders right into the ground, right into the bedrock foundation. Every time it happened, if you have a glass of water or just a water bottle, you'd actually see the water move, like in Jurassic Park, right? Just continuously. For like 3 months they were doing that. Thank God it was the summer, so we didn't have that many classes. But what they were doing was putting those steel beams deep into the ground. So then you can anchor that huge building into place. Here, same concept, right? we need to anchor the cell into the ground. So we have these little struts, proteins, instead of steel. But the same concept is true. We need to anchor the cell into place, and we have these, right, protein-made struts that's kind of pushed into the ground right here, into the basement membrane. So then this cell and all the cells that's connected to it will be anchored in place. Next one, zonal adherens, right? Zonal adherens, if you take a look at it, these are the adhesion belt. Zonal adherens right here look like little Velcro, right? They're stronger than desmosomes. Desmosomes are, main purpose is to redistribute stress. This is slightly stronger, so then, right, they're a little bit less mobile between the cells, but they also allow things to go through, right? They're not quite as strong or as tight as the next one that we'll talk about. Whoops. Right? Zonal adherens, weak glue, think Velcro, keeping the cells together. Right? Simple epithelium, simple squamish, simple cuboidal, simple columnar. Contain zonal adherens, so then they adhere to each other without a lot of movement. The last one that we see in most cells are the last one right here. Then we'll talk about gap junctions. They're special. Zonal adherens or zonal occludents are the tight junctions. Right? They occlude things from getting through. This is our Gore-Tex waterproof seal. Right? The main purpose is to stop even water from getting past. So, in other words, if water can't get past, nothing really can get past, right? So you don't want it everywhere because nothing will get through. So we see in areas where we need a permeability barrier, where we need to stop any kind of fluid to go from one side to the other. We see it in the stomach, in the bladder. So then hydrochloric acids can't get past. Right? We also see it in the blood vessels in our brain. So then even water can't get through. Because remember, if water gets out of the blood vessels, it starts building up in the brain. Now we have cerebral edema, which is not good. So even water needs to be limited. And it looks like this kind of Gore-Tex waterproof seal. The last one we'll talk about is gap junctions. Gap junctions contain tiny holes right here, right? Whereas these other type of junctions are just cell connections. Gap junctions allow ions to go from one cell to the next. They connect, but there's a little gap inside that allows movement of ions from cell to cell. And that's how cells communicate, right? So when we talk about intercellular communication, communication between a cell, cells don't have eyes, they don't have ears, nothing like that, right? They communicate by moving ions from one cell to the next. In the heart and the smooth muscle, they allow for coordination of the muscles of the heart. And that's important for the heart, right? The last thing we want to do is have the heart, there are going to be 4 chambers in the heart, right? You have 2 on top called the atrias, 2 on the bottom called the ventricles. There's a rhythm at which they have to contract. Atrias first, then ventricles. Atrias first, then ventricles. You need that synchrony, right? Well, that synchrony is due to these gap junctions, allowing you to control which cells contract when. If all 4 chambers contract at the same time, right, you can have very inefficient movement of blood. So we need that ability to control, right, and communicate. We have lots of gap junctions in cardiac muscles as a result. All right, a couple, actually, it's 10:50 only. All right, we'll talk about this, then we'll take a break. Glands. Now, you don't need to know the different classifications of exocrine glands, right? I want you to know the difference between the glands and the different types of exocrine glands in terms of how they release their content, right? We'll talk about these again in chapter 5. So this is just an introduction of it. So glands is a combination of epithelial tissue and some supporting connective tissue keeping it together. There's two main categories, right? One is called endocrine glands. The other type of glands are called exocrine glands. Now, endocrine glands do not have any direct contact, right? Instead, whatever they produce gets released into the bloodstream. Because they get produced and released in the bloodstream, you have a massive systemic effect. It goes wherever blood goes, which is everywhere, right? So when you make and you release hormones from endocrine glands, they get immediately shuttled into your bloodstream. And the blood and the heart carries it throughout your body. We call that a systemic effect, right? We see it in the pancreas when it releases insulin and glucagon. The thyroid releases thyroid glands, right? The pituitary gland, there's a very important gland. It releases growth hormone. It releases, right, ACTH, thyroid stimulating hormone, GnRH, all these hormones that allows us to have homeostasis. It's going to be released into the bloodstream. So endocrine gland, released into the bloodstream, and since it gets released in the bloodstream, it goes everywhere. So there's a systemic effect. The next kind of gland are exocrine glands. Exocrine glands produces some content, an enzyme, a little hormone, right? And that enzyme usually are going to be brought to a certain location by a series of ducts that connects the gland to where it works. Again, we see it in the pancreas. The pancreas is going to have one really big connection between the pancreas and the small intestine. All of the enzymes produced by the pancreas then follows the duct all the way out. Now, it produces a localized effect. Only the areas that are connected to the duct will receive the enzyme, right? The other areas don't receive the enzyme because they're not connected to it. Now, ducts with its CT, right? Ducts we see all the time. If you have central air at home, if you have central heat at home, right? If you have central heating, you have a furnace in the basement that produces that warm air. And then you have a series of those aluminum ducts that carries the warm air to each room, right? Those are the ducts. So only the rooms that have the ducts will receive the actual hot air. You have a garage. Well, the garage is huge, right? Usually it's not heated. Why? Well, it's so big and it's very external. Usually they don't have a duct connected to it. All right? Because that room doesn't have a duct connected to it, it's not heated. Only the areas that are connected to the duct will receive that heat. Same thing here. Only the areas or the organ that receives and has a duct will receive that enzyme and have a local effect. So there's a little bit of a smaller localized effect when we have an exocrine gland. Endocrine, it goes everywhere. So there's a complete body-wide systemic effect. Right? So how about those exocrine glands? How do they secrete their contents? Endocrine gland, they just secrete it. Right? Exocrine gland, and again, we will talk about these again in chapter 5. I do want you to know the difference. Right? One, American glands. What do? These cells of the gland produce secretions by active transport or produce vesicles that contain secretory products. They empty their contents into ducts by exocytosis, meaning all you do is release the content, nothing else, right? American glands are like your normal sweat glands. So the sweat glands that allows us to cool, those sweat glands, all they do is release sodium chloride. As they release sodium chloride out, water follows. As water follows, now you have that slightly salty kind of sweat coming out of the pores on your skin. that type of sweat that allows us to cool our body doesn't have a smell. Shouldn't have a smell, right? Why? It's only sodium chloride and water. Maybe a little bit of urea. I know, it's kind of gross, right? But that's it. Shouldn't smell. So if you have sweat on your forearm because it's hot out, next time that happens, I know it's kind of gross, I want you to smell it. It shouldn't smell at all, right? Its sole purpose is to kind of cool your skin so then we can radiate heat away. The second kind of gland can smell, right? Called apocrine glands. Apocrine glands are found also in your skin, right? And usually the apocrine glands are found on the skin and it's attached to hair follicles, right? In apocrine glands, you release something and you pinch off a little bit of the plasma membrane. So you have a little bit of fat and fatty acids that go with it, right? Now, that little bit of fat and fatty acids, well, are the bacterium in our skin metabolizes the fats and the fatty acids, and it causes us to have body odor, right? So that does happen. The sole purpose of why we have those glands, right, is to kind of make your hair nice and supple, right? So if you've ever gone a couple days without washing your hair, what happens to your hair? Right? It gets oily, gets kind of greasy, right? Now most people hate that, but it's actually protective when it's greasy and has those oils. Those oils are actually beneficial up to a point, right? So what happens is those oils that allows us to kind of make the hair supple, well, those oils are formed from these glands found in your scalp. Now, holocrine glands, you produce the content and then the cell actually dies, right? Those are obviously going to have whole cells in it, so it's going to have a lot of fatty acids and phospholipids, right? Sebaceous glands also empty into the, right, hairs. Usually we find it in the axillary region, armpit, right? So those regions then also smell because the cell dies, the lipids get removed, and then the bacterium in our skin uses those lipids to produce body odor, right? All right, let's take a break. Come back.